Welcome to Catastrophes. This is a podcast about disasters, why disasters happen, the factors that make them happen. Today, we're previewing a hazard, avalanches, as it is avalanche season, March and April, predominantly in Canada, Western Canada. We see quite a few avalanches. So I figured probably somebody out there who knows more about avalanches than I do, and I was able to find him. His name is Dr. Simon Horton, and he is a avalanche forecaster. We have a really great discussion, about an hour and 20 minutes of talking about different maps for avalanches, how avalanches form, the different types. So if you are interested in any sort of hazard, how they happen, why they happen, and the threats to public safety, this episode is for you. Today's episode is not intended to demean or diminish the experiences of people who face difficult, traumatic disasters and avalanches, but rather explore, question, critique, and ask why these disasters happen the way they do. And with that, let's begin. Welcome to Catastrophes. Today, I'm with Dr. Simon Horton, who is a research officer and an avalanche forecaster, and we have, I'm going to say, a thrilling conversation, maybe exciting, maybe I don't know how we can describe avalanches any more exciting than what they really sound like, but we have a discussion about avalanches. So, Dr. Horton, if I could ask, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, Brady.
Awesome. You're calling from, suspect, somewhere in the mountains. Can I ask where?
Yeah, my home's in Kimberley, BC, so that's kind of in the southeast corner of BC, just between the Rocky and Purcell Mountains.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so you're to and from work. You're near the mountains. You're doing avalanche forecasting, so that's pretty cool. Um, I, I guess I want to hear just a little bit about you. Can you tell me what you do as a research officer and an avalanche forecaster, and then just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, my current job is to work on avalanche forecasts. So, I work for Avalanche Canada. That's kind of Canada's national avalanche safety organization. And during the winter months, one of the big services we provide is free avalanche forecasts for backcountry areas. And that's for people who are going into the backcountry to ski, snowmobile, hike, and give them kind of information and tools they need so they can be safe. So the winter part of that job really involves tracking the weather, snow, and trying to assess the avalanche danger and finding effective ways to communicate that to people. And in the summer, I work as a researcher, specifically on avalanche safety. So I have a number of projects we can talk about on that. And I kind of got into this path through the academic route. Avalanche forecasting, avalanche work, there's quite a mix of people with academic and more practical backgrounds. And it's really kind of an interdisciplinary field. And I come from the more academic stream. So I was originally trained as an engineer. Engineering physics was my kind of study area, and that was in Ontario, far from the mountains. I didn't really know a lot about the field that I'm working in now.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Can I ask what kind of engineering you were in, and how did you get into studying avalanches? What was that journey like?
Mm-hmm. So it was engineering physics was the kind of discipline I worked on specifically. So it's pretty math, physics heavy, fairly abstract, but gives you a good general understanding of how complex systems work.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly applies to both weather and the mountains. So um, yeah, I was originally from Ontario and moved out to BC for summer jobs while I was in school, learned about the mountains and wanted to spend more time and fell in love with skiing and eventually backcountry skiing, and wanted to find some kind of graduate school program that involved more like geography or the outdoors, and happened upon finding an avalanche research program that was based at the University of Calgary. And that kind of opened the door for me to this work that I'm doing now.
Oh, University of Calgary grad, University of Calgary grad. We're alum. This is like the reunion pod. Okay, we're on a good track then. So you basically live in the mountains. You live and breathe avalanches and just mountains in general. I gotta ask the first question, and it's been on my mind as I've been preparing for this. Any close calls with avalanches? Have you been near them, or have you seen active ones?
So I guess first off, like you see evidence of them pretty often if you're traveling in the mountains, but ideally you're not near them when they happen.
Yeah.
I have had kind of two incidents come to mind. One that's kind of my very first winter in Western Canada, kind of while I was kind of new to backcountry skiing, loosely aware I had some basic training. I had like safety equipment,
Hmm.
and it was a pretty small avalanche just outside of Rossland, BC, where I was living, and um, yeah, it was just a small, unsuspecting slope, or at least unsuspecting for me. But there was what we call the wind slab there. So the wind had kind of blown over a ridge, formed a small pocket of snow. And um, I was actually had already skied near it. And then my friend was skiing now after me, and he skied over this wind slab, and it triggered and kind of came towards me. And like I grabbed onto a tree and it shaked, and I was able to hold on to the trees that moved past, which isn't possible with bigger avalanches.
No way. That's crazy. So like you've been in you're one of the few scientists who like experience the disaster that they've endured, you can say, right?
I suppose that's like, yeah, I guess, yeah, tornado chasers don't ideally go fully
Yeah,
into the
hopefully
tornadoes.
not,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Wow, that's kind of like a claim to fame, I guess you could say. But you were
Not one
mentioning
you want to have, though. Like, ideally,
no.
you want to avoid these. And it is common that in the people who work with avalanche safety over their careers, that they have a number of encounters or close calls. And there's kind
Mm,
of this pattern where you have a close call and kind of your risk tolerance changes in response. And you want to learn more and kind of be more cautious. And that was certainly true. I went safely avoided avalanches for about 15 years after that. And then just a few years ago, had a close call with a colleague. We were both quite experienced.
mm.
Um, and yeah, there was various kind of human factors played into role. We lost our awareness, misassessed the slope, and had a close call with an avalanche there. So it wasn't just because I was a beginner. It's a very complex thing to forecast and predict.
Wow. So two avalanches in 16 years. Can I ask how long you've been in the field of studying avalanches?
Um, like studying would be about 15 years.
Wow. Okay. So you're a veteran and you're going to give us some good advice about how we can avoid avalanches, and then I suspect some things about some forecasting. But you mentioned before you got some interesting projects. What's new and exciting that you're doing?
Um, the thing that I'm like most involved with and passionate about is looking at numerical methods to forecast avalanches.
Hmm.
Um, and so that involves more or less creating computer simulations of the mountain snowpack.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah.
Cool. Keep talking about that. How does that look, and like what how are we going to benefit from that?
Mhm. Um, well, where to begin here? So, yeah, there's these sets of tools that have kind of been used by researchers for quite a long time, like since the
Mm,
90s, that were computer models that simulate layers in the snow
mhm.
um, based on the weather and terrain data. So if you take the hourly weather data at a location, say a weather station, and you can kind of trace from the start of the season when it snows, and you can kind of add up different layers in the snow, and then using the temperature, radiation, other weather parameters, figure out exactly how that snow's changing over time. Is it becoming stronger, weaker? And you can kind of more or less reconstruct a virtual picture of the snow, and ideally use that to try to predict where and when there's weaknesses that could cause an avalanche. Um,
Wow.
and the challenge now, that works if you have a weather station and a really well instrumented research site, but it becomes way trickier if you try to apply this over bigger remote areas where you don't have
Mm.
that input data. So my work has largely been trying to like take this theoretical model that predicts the layers of the snow quite well and apply it in these big, diverse, complex mountain ranges. And
That's
so,
cool.
yeah, I've been working on doing that for Avalanche Canada and other Canadian avalanche safety organizations for, I guess, about a decade. And in the last 2 years, it's become much more of an international collaboration as other countries are kind of looking at doing similar methods.
Cool, because it's working. So you're leading the successful project is what you're saying then.
It's been, yeah, it's picking up. It's starting to like complement the traditional way of forecasting, which is more like boots on the ground, and kind of really looking at snow observations.
Oh,
And I guess I could backtrack that the need for this work is that a lot of scenarios in forecasting were data sparse.
huh.
So the mountains are so expansive and the snowpack changes so much across both space and time. There's really like not all the data we would want to kind of keep track of these changes. And so we're looking kind of for these computer models to fill in the gaps.
Wow. That's cool. I think that's a nice segue to one of the first questions I have for you, which is, I guess, what are avalanches? And can you tell us also how they happen? Because you just mentioned like they happen so quickly and whatnot. So really interested to just hear what they are.
Yeah. So I think the best definition I've heard is it's a mass of snow moving down slope at a visible speed.
Hmm.
Not that exciting for like what they actually are. These big, like fast moving,
Mm-hmm.
thunderous crashes of snow with powder clouds and all types of dynamics going on. But ultimately, what happens is there's different strengths of snow. There's like stronger snow, weak snow, and all avalanches result from some kind of weak snow. So as material, snow is, I believe, the weakest natural occurring material that we know of. Its structure is like a very, very high percentage air, and it only gets its strength through small little bonds in the ice between the grains. But
Cool.
It's very weak, and like kind of the strength comes from how many of these ice bonds there are between the snowflakes.
Wow. Okay.
And
So what causes that? What causes avalanches then?
okay, so there's now two types of avalanches:
Hmm.
loose and slab. Loose avalanches are where kind of the upper part of the snow is all composed of weak snow that has no cohesion, and it just kind of falls down the slope. These often aren't as big, and they kind of happen in a fan-like pattern. Like it might just be starting at a very small local point where some snow starts to fall apart down slope, and it picks up mass and moves down, and they form these triangle shapes down the slope.
Cool.
But the interesting ones are called slab avalanches. This is where you have, again, some kind of weak snow, but it's sitting underneath harder, stronger snow. It's more or less, we have like a weak layer that's sandwiched between harder layers. And when those weak layers break, you have this whole slab of heavy snow above it that now is no longer attached and it falls down the slope.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
cool.
So
So
the analogy there would be kind of like a layered cake or a
yeah.
peanut butter sandwich where the weak layer is this thin little layer of weak snow and the stuff above it is sliding. If you tip it over, it slides down.
That
And these are much bigger because that snow above it, you could have meters of snow and like hundreds of kilograms per cubic meter.
yeah, and so they're so powerful. And I mean, I guess when we see like the big videos that hopefully I'm able to show one today, but like the power of just some of them looks like it's just so powerful, I guess. And that tracks with what you're saying.
Yeah, they definitely like if the terrain they're on, the slope is big and steep enough, like they can pick up speeds of 200 kilometers per hour or more.
Wow.
And have like quite high impact pressures because even like when you have a slab, the density of the slab can be quite big, quite large, and if it's a bigger slope, a larger mass of snow, you have like that mass and the like speeds creates quite destructive impacts.
Oh, that's interesting. How are they caused? Is it because loose snow is moving or is there other factors involved there?
Yeah, so it comes down to this idea that there's like strong snow and weak snow,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some kind of stress that's applied to that weak snow that like where the stress exceeds the strength. So most commonly that stress is from natural causes. It's if it's snowing really quick hard or the wind's blowing snow or if it warms up very suddenly, there's a lot of heat. There's some kind of natural stress where like it's exceeded that strength and that'll happen like rather spontaneously. And then that stress could also be applied by like kind of just an artificial load. So the one that would commonly come to mind would be a human traveling on the slope, like a skier. A lot of most accidents involve people actually triggering the avalanche themselves. And basically now like it's their extra weight on the snow that's causing that initial break.
Huh. So there's like that I don't remember those cartoons, but the person who yells into like the mountain valley and then it like echoes throughout and then it causes the avalanche. Is that real or can we put that myth to bed?
I don't know if like a megaphone is loud enough, but it's certainly like similar to a common process for artificially triggered avalanches, which is explosives. That's the kind of
Oh.
the idea. There is like you want to have an avalanche in a controlled environment where like you know when it's going to happen. You can
Mm.
make sure there's nobody in its path at the time. This is a very common practice, and explosives are a common tool there. Um, in particular, if you suspend explosives above the snow,
Mm.
there's this air blast, and that kind of pressure wave from the air is a sufficient force to cause an avalanche. So that air blast, if you can get like a good air blast with a big powerful blow of the blowhorn, then I could see it happening.
Wow, that's okay. That's kind of cool. Let's dive into that. The explosions. Have you seen any of the big explosions go off, or is it more so like you've maybe just heard them?
um, I guess there's yeah. I've worked with explosives, but at a smaller scale at a ski resort,
Hmm.
and there you're using like relatively smaller amounts. Um, and I've never been involved in any that produced a big avalanche. But I have seen them. Some of the big explosions that come to mind would be on Rogers Pass on the Trans Canada Highway
Hmm.
through BC, where they use howitzers um, and are able to produce very big avalanches there because the terrain is so big, and that's one spot where explosives are used quite a bit.
Wow. So are we using explosives to generate avalanches for preparedness and making sure that it's safe in times where we don't have to be there, or like what's the reasoning and rationale for that?
Mm-hmm. So the main idea is the thinking is it's better to have many small avalanches than letting the snow build up until there's so much that it's going to be very big.
Wow.
So an idea there, yeah, is they're trying to prevent very big avalanches. Like in the example of Rogers Pass, they don't want avalanches hitting the road for obvious reasons. And if they just left it undisturbed, that snow would pile up. So they strategically are firing explosives to produce small avalanches that will stop well before the road.
Okay, that's cool. So I have our first image here, and uh, I found this in report. I think your name was on this report, so maybe you took this photo. But from what I'm seeing, would this be maybe we can diagnose a few of these things? What
Mhm.
kind of the two avalanches is this, if we can determine that? And this looks like a pretty big one to me, but maybe it's not.
It's big, yeah. So first off, in terms of the type, it's a little hard to see when it's actually moving. There's what we're
Hmm.
calling a powder cloud. That's all this suspended snow, creating those kind of puffy cloud-like look features, and you can't really see what's happening in the snow underneath it. But um, the best way to diagnose it is once it stopped moving. A slab avalanche, you can often actually see like a patch of snow where it started with like defined boundaries where that slab broke and slid off. Um, but I would guess that given the size of this one, it is a slab just because they're much bigger.
Wow.
And then I wanted to add that there's an avalanche size scale. We rate them on a size of 1 to 5.
Hmm.
Um,
Five being the worst or one being the worst?
Good question. 5 is the worst. Um, and the scale, it's a little tricky because we don't have like objective measurements. It's not like a tornado where we can measure the wind speed and that speed tells us what it is.
Hmm.
Rather, it's based on destructive potential.
Oh.
So we try to imagine like if you put some kind of vulnerable object in the path of that avalanche where the avalanche is at its most powerful, what would it be able to like destroy or hurt? So a size 1 is relatively harmless to a person. It only involves probably like maybe an area of like tens of meters, not a very deep layer. It might knock you over, but it's not going to necessarily carry or bury you. Size 2 is large enough to injure or kill a person.
Hmm.
So we're only at size 2 out of 5, and we're already
That's
like
crazy. Yeah.
it's already dangerous for a human. And then we get bigger from there. Size threes can destroy or knock over railway cars if it's hitting like a train track. And then we get to fours and fives. Now we're destroying like large areas of forests or villages.
Wow.
Um,
So on first glance, we're getting maybe around a 3 or a 4 with this one. Looks like.
yeah, you got it. I would say, yeah, you can't tell for sure, but that's like it's more than a two, and depending on the amount of snow that's actually moving through there, could be up to a four. Um,
Wow.
I mentioned that powder cloud.
Hmm.
When big avalanches are in motion, they kind of have two parts. There's like the dense flow, kind of low to the ground, where the bulk of the mass of the snow is.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's some snow gets suspended in what's called the powder cloud, and that's what we're kind of seeing above it, that powder cloud.
Wow. That's kind of like the signature look of what an avalanche looks like too for me. I always think of like an avalanche and I always think of that exact thing. So I mean, wow.
Yeah,
Hey,
this is the ones that they'll put in movies and that. Yeah.
yeah. So going back to the scale, the difference between a 4 and a 5, what is that? Is it kind of more of an art than a science and it's like, it could be a 4 or a 5.
There are some like guidelines into like the amount of forest it would destroy or the typical amount volume of snow that's moving in it. So if it was deposited and you kind of made a rough estimate of how much snow is in that deposit to calculate it, but in practice, it's been a hard one to assess. Like people are often observers are often hesitant to rate a size five, just because they don't know if it really is that much
Wow.
bigger.
So that's incredible, right? And before you mentioned, when we get to a 3 and a 4, it has the potential to destroy buildings and entire swaths of forest. So I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, and I think often to get something like a five, you'll need kind of a bigger piece of terrain. So it needs a kind of a bigger, what we call the start zone, the top of the path where it actually starts. The kind of bigger and more snow there, the more potential for a large avalanche.
Oh, that's cool. So the preparedness and using, all the explosives is to prevent the fives from happening, and then our
Yeah,
risk is lower, basically. Hmm.
or whatever size is of concern. So, like, for example, in ski resorts, um, they often use or some resorts, if they have terrain that requires it, will close areas, use explosives to make sure there aren't any avalanches that skiers might trigger,
Hmm.
and then open it afterwards. So in that case, they might just be trying to prevent size ones or twos.
Oh, that's even interesting too. Wow. Who typically is using like the big explosives? Like, is that the ski resorts who have access to the howitzers?
So it probably changes a little bit internationally between different countries of how they manage avalanche safety to the public.
Hmm.
But it's in Canada, there's a mix. I guess there's kind of the idea that there's controlled terrain in some ways
Hmm.
and uncontrolled or backcountry terrain where like no one's out there actually doing anything to modify the snow or control the risk. What I do as a public forecaster at Avalanche Canada is the backcountry forecasting for uncontrolled terrain.
Oh, that's cool. So you're doing the potential big ones then too, right? Like,
Oh, yeah, we're trying to forecast them when there's potential for them.
hmm, okay.
And if I go back to the idea of controlled terrain, now there's several different types.
Hmm.
Um, One of like kind of the critical ones is protecting the transportation corridors through Canada because these people driving on the roads, they're not necessarily aware of the risk. They're kind of assuming it's safe to drive.
Hmm.
Um, and so these are all done by government agencies. And if the government has kind of
Yeah.
people, forecasters who are in charge of monitoring conditions, closing it, doing explosives, as that's kind of seen as like a public need.
Yeah. Especially living in the mountains, right? When,
Yeah.
roadways are sometimes isolated, there's only 2 lanes going to and from. So
Mhm.
that tracks with me.
And then there's also kind of more of like the the private or industry sector. So there's things like ski resorts.
Mhm.
Ski resorts that have avalanche terrain, will hire staff and have programs in place for that. Um, Industrial sites like mines and logging operations, again, they'll hire people to manage it there. Um, and one other type of avalanche risk management would be getting a guide for people who are going into uncontrolled areas. They hire a guide, um, and the guide will help them pick safe areas.
Wow.
So there's quite a variety of ways that avalanches are being tracked, and how different professionals are out there trying to keep people safe.
That part is really interesting. So, can I ask, are you a guide? Do you go and do that kind of crazy stuff, or you just doing forecasting?
No, I'm not a guide. That's a fairly intensive additional training to do. Yeah, so
Wow.
don't do that. I do. Yeah, there's definitely overlap in the skills. Like both guides and avalanche forecasters,
Yeah.
they need to be trained in how to do avalanche rescue, and a lot of their abilities to observe the weather and snow and interpret that are the same. Um, but I don't have the skills to actually lead a group of people through the mountains.
Oh, that's okay. We need your services. So I
I
really
will add though that definitely as a hobby and recreation, I love going into the backcountry and traveling. Yeah, my wife and I have done a lot of neat trips together, and that's a big reason that makes us passionate about this work. Is that in my spare time I love to go and explore around the mountains, and definitely to do that safely you have to be tuned into all these things and thinking about the potential for avalanches.
that's really cool. So let's walk through that kind of idea about instability, I guess. And really the question I have for you is, why on one day can a mountain be totally safe and stable, but then dangerous the next? Like, what changes?
Yeah, the weather is basically the short answer.
Hmm.
The snowpack is super responsive to changes in the weather. Um, so for one, the weather, you could just get new snow. Like a whole bunch of new snow can fall, and that's going to add a new layer to the snow. It's going to typically new snow. It's softer, weaker, so you could have avalanches just in the snow that falls,
Hmm.
or it could be adding stress to any kind of existing weakness in the snow. And then other times you might not get necessarily new layers in the snow, but the layers that are there are their stress versus strength balance
Hmm.
is changing just because of changes in the weather. Like if it gets warmer or colder, these all kinds of complex changes happen in the snowpack.
Oh, see that's interesting. I think that kind of goes into my next question, which is about like climate change and seeing temperatures that might be more sporadic, I guess you could say. Are warmer winters, do they increase or decrease the risk of avalanches, or do we not know?
There's certainly questions about the full set of impacts. Um, one of the more maybe intuitive, obvious trends is the warmer it gets, the less snow, and
Hmm.
so potentially less avalanches in certain areas.
Hmm.
I think ways that could look is that the avalanche season could be getting shorter in many areas, like by winter starting later and ending early,
Hmm.
and particularly at elevation, so lower elevations, as in the winter, rain becomes more common at lower elevations. There's just less snow down low. So that's one overall theme is warmer temperatures or less snow.
Of course.
That being said, there's still a lot of snow falling up at higher elevations, and there's still a lot of complex dynamics and avalanche potential there. And I think that's where more the interesting studies have gone to figure out what's going to happen there. And so one common theme is they think there'll be more wet avalanches, or avalanches caused by rain falling on the snow.
Wow.
Um, and then the other one, which is harder to make the links on, is that really the layers in the snow and the avalanche conditions they depend on the weather. And so any kind of change in the weather patterns will naturally change the avalanche patterns. But it's largely dependent on kind of the day-to-day progression of like what happens in this storm versus the dry, and then the dry period, then the storm after that. This kind of sequence of events that's what builds up these weaknesses in the snow. So it's certainly possible that like if changing weather patterns create more severe dry periods and more intense storms, you could get these kind of short-lived cycles where the danger is influenced.
Those lines are really interesting to me because and I guess like we go back to like your first point, less snow might mean there's less avalanches, and but at the same time there could be more wet avalanches, which I suspect we don't see a ton of right now, right?
Yeah, so this goes back to I initially said there's two types of avalanches, loose and slab. There's actually four because we also classify them as wet and dry.
Oh,
and they can happen in both combos. Like you can have dry loose and dry slab, wet loose, wet slab.
cool.
And all that basically means is there liquid water in the snow or not? Is it kind of a water snow mix, or is it straight snow? And these avalanches, they behave a little different when they're actually moving. Wet avalanches, they don't move as fast. You don't get that big powder cloud. They're more of a slow moving kind of serpentine thing, but they're very destructive. They have a lot of mass from that heavy liquid water. So they're just they have different dynamics when they move. And wet avalanches are very common, typically in the springtime, though, kind of as the snowpack's melting and you get liquid water from either rain or long hot days. But many places are seeing more of them kind of throughout the winter now.
Oh, wow. That's it. So can I ask, can you still have on the scale 1 to 5, can you still have a level 5 as a wet avalanche, or is it just related to dry avalanches?
Yeah, you can.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Are we more likely to see like the bigger ones, like the 4s and the 5s with wet avalanches, or not really?
Could probably go either way. I wouldn't necessarily say
that's
one way or the other.
That's cool. All right. So I mean, some of the things I kind of draw from that is, and what I see, one of the changes of climate change being the warmer temperatures is like just more sporadic weather conditions, and I suspect that probably makes your job maybe a little harder from time to time. But like for avalanches, are avalanches becoming more unpredictable or harder to forecast, or because we know that there's less snow, maybe shorter seasons, maybe we're a little bit better to predict them, or we have more capability to predict them? What do you think there?
I'm not 100% positive on whether they're easier or harder. I think one of my inclination is to say that like they're just so dependent on the current weather that if you have a good handle on what weather's happened in the past this season and what the weather coming in is, you should be able to kind of anticipate what's happening. And I would say just the ability that the improvement in weather forecasts in recent years, especially like in mountainous terrain, has in many ways has made it easier to forecast avalanches. Just kind of having more precision of how much it actually is going to snow and when's it going to snow, and in a specific place in the mountains. That's a really like kind of more modern feature we have that's making it easier. And provided weather forecasts are still like able to adapt to like changes in the climate, that should stay the same. I guess ideally these kind of tools that we have, like weather forecasts or snowpack models that I'm working on, if they're really based on like solid physical principles of like what happens when you add this mass of snow at this temperature, it should be resilient to like changing averages in those inputs. But in reality, a lot of these models are like kind of calibrated based on like past field data and like these kind of sites. true with weather forecasts too. So the more of these kind of calibrations that are happening at specific sites in the past, the less faith we can have in these tools in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about technology then, and like the emergence and advances in technology. And I know that you have you're working with a bunch of new cool technologies. I guess if I could like put it broadly, what are some of the emerging technologies that are assisting us with preparedness for avalanche forecasting?
So I previously mentioned the work I'm doing on like snowpack and avalanche hazard modeling, and that's certainly something that was rarely used about 10 years ago, and it's now kind of becoming a tool that forecasters who are kind of trying to assess the danger, they have these traditional methods of looking at field observations, interpreting them, kind of thinking about the weather forecast and anticipating changes in the conditions. And they're learning how to use these tools now, and kind of as like a human machine team to assess it. And I think, yeah, there's definitely potential that these tools will play a bigger role in how forecasters are predicting avalanches, especially in like times and locations where we don't have field observations to anchor off of. There's also a fair bit of technology in actually more of the work of avalanche control. So I was talking about
Cool.
kind of explosives before.
Mhm.
There's a few things that are coming into play there. There's a lot more instrumentation and equipment being installed in the mountains to help track avalanches and even to trigger them as well too. Instead of like previously it was all manual. You'd have to know that avalanches were occurring, you had to send someone out either driving down the road or skiing around or flying to like see the avalanche. And now they're installing kind of radars and different types of seismic detectors that are actually detecting the avalanches and alerting people that there's avalanches occurring. And then there's also technologies for deploying the explosives. So there's what's called RACs, or remote avalanche control systems.
Cool.
And there's a couple of different types of these things. It's basically kind of instrument or equipment installed on the slope that carries the explosives, and the forecaster can decide when to detonate them. And that's as instead of having to be able to like fly a helicopter, which is a very traditional method, but you can't fly during all weather, or like fire a howitzer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those cool improvements, right? Because it's like, oh, we're gonna take a helicopter up and we're gonna throw that bomb off the side of the helicopter. We're gonna get out of there. It's one of those movies, but not the case anymore, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it depends on scale. Like a lot of this equipment is like costly, so it's being installed in more like high impact areas, like the transportation corridors are a common one.
Yeah, of course, and like that's the economic potential and possible risk. I want to talk about something that's openly accessible to everybody, and that's the avalanche mapping. So I'm gonna share the avalanche map right now, and are you able to see what I'm seeing with the different colors here?
Yeah.
This is really cool. Run me through what we got here and what we're looking at.
Okay, yeah. So this is avalanche.ca. It's the place where you can get current avalanche forecast information for popular mountain areas for mostly Western Canada. If you zoom out, zoom over to the East Coast, you'll see we actually have them in Newfoundland and the Gaspé region of Quebec.
Well, there's something. We're going to be having you come back to talk about those areas.
Yeah. There's a rich history of like avalanches and on the East Coast. But yeah, the map right now, the regions are bigger and more colorful here. So the idea here is we've mapped out kind of the areas where people are commonly recreating in avalanche terrain. This is kind of for these uncontrolled areas where people are going into the backcountry. We want to give them information about the current conditions. So we really kind of encourage people who want to recreate in the backcountry, which is like it's a really fun activity and it's possible to do safely,
Mm.
provided you're just doing some of the key things like you have training, you have avalanche rescue equipment, you knowing how to use it, and you're actually looking at the forecast because basically the for you can go out and have a good time provided you're picking terrain that's safe for the conditions.
Mm.
Um, and so we describe the kind of the conditions now on a different scale of 1 to 5. It's across the bottom there. This is the avalanche danger scale.
Mm.
And what it now does is it's describing the size, likelihood, and distribution of avalanches.
Cool.
And so, as forecasters, we're kind of looking at different mountainous areas, tracking the snow and the weather there, and trying to assign for the next few days how severe is the avalanche danger going to be there. Is going to be there. And if you click on one of these areas, you get more info that describes the types of avalanches we're expecting,
Wow.
where they're expected, and kind of if you are going out, what you should be thinking about.
This is brilliant. And so for the audio folks, what we have in front of us is a map. We're in British Columbia right now, and there's a lot of colors here. There's green, which is a low risk. There's yellow, which is getting to a 2, a moderate. Orange, which I've just clicked on, which is 3, and it's considerable risk. And then there's red. And there is a part of BC that is red right now. We're going to click on it soon, but we got to stick with this orange part, which looks to be west of Prince George and in a few areas near Terrace, BC.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool.
Yeah. So I can describe a bit about this scale because there's some key things there.
Yeah.
So low means generally safe avalanche conditions. It means like most areas won't have avalanches, and those isolated spots where they're probably going to be small, like size 1, not very harmful.
Hmm.
If we go all the way up to high or like red, which is 4 out of the 5-point scale, it generally means very dangerous avalanche conditions. There's going to be lots of avalanches and they're going to be large.
Wow.
And it basically means you don't want to be recreating in avalanche terrain at all. And then these middle areas of moderate and considerable, which are 2 and 3 out of the scale, they're the real tricky ones because it means there's avalanches possible in some areas. They might be small, they might be large. It's this kind of middle ground. And these tend to be the trickiest if you are in the mountains to kind of interpret because some slopes might be safe and some aren't.
Yeah, this is brilliant. So I was actually thinking of going to Jasper, pretty soon. So maybe I can use part of this scale. We're green, so we're going tonight. There is low danger, but I should still be aware, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also just a good resource for weather info if you're going into the mountains. Because the people doing these forecasts are spending so much time interpreting the mountain weather. Um, there's a part if you scroll down in there that goes to the weather forecast.
Oh, cool.
There's also like a mountain weather forecast on a different page on this website that kind of describes weather, but more from the mountain perspective of like snow, snowfall, winds, kind of what the weather's going to be like at higher elevations.
Oh, that's interesting. Look at that. And so freezing level at valley bottom compared to some isolated flurries and whatnot. This is like really a cool resource. And I was not aware. So let me ask a few different questions about this, just to pick your brain further. We've got this big red one over here in Northwest BC, and I'm seeing these little numbers. There's 6 weather stations as I hover over it. So that's pretty cool. These weather stations are effectively telling us how the weather is going and whatnot, or
Yeah, so there's a number of different kind of layers of information added to the map in addition to that regional scale rating, which is like they're really applied over pretty big areas of like hundreds of kilometers, entire mountain ranges. And so we try to provide some additional information to help people plan their trip. And a good one of those is from automated weather stations. We try to find different stations that are out there that are providing good representative values of the mountains. And if you click on any of those, you can get an hourly recount of recent weather at that station.
Really? Wow.
And then there was also blue dots on the map, and those are trip reports from people who've been out in the past few days. And they're very more local scales, and they'll describe kind of what they saw. They usually have photos. Photos are really helpful. If they see avalanches, there could be photos of them.
Look at that. Hey, is that you?
No, that is actually an Avalanche Canada staff member. They're out doing field observations. Looks like they're holding a piece of hard, crusty snow.
That is, you must have a lot of good pictures of all the places. Like this is brilliant. And so, this image right here would be an example of a small avalanche or a wet slide.
Small? What? Yeah. Slab or loose? What do you think?
I want to say this is a slab.
Yeah, that like line across it is kind of what
Yeah.
we call a crown. It's like the perimeters of where it initially released.
That's brilliant. So for the audio listeners, I clicked on one of these blue dots on this map, and it basically pulled up a whole bunch of information related to that area. I guess I should ask the area. It's near Smithers, which is in central BC. And on this blue dot, there are a number of photos, and one of them is a avalanche where we can actually see the outlines of the side of the avalanche where it happened and the snowpack that has really run down the hill. Very, very cool.
Yeah. And I'll comment, it's not like a one-to-one thing, but you will note that, oh, that one is bigger. That first one looked like a smaller avalanche, and the area that you're clicking on is currently rated as moderate or 2 out of 5. Whereas areas with the higher danger rating, you could possibly find photos of larger avalanches.
Oh, well, we're going to do that. We have one near Terrace. So let's just check out One and Done in Sleeping Beauty. I suspect this is one of the paths. And in this, the snow conditions are shown. Snow conditions, powder, and no photos there. But let's see if we can find. This is a backcountry skiing. No photos there. Dang.
I don't know for sure, but I have an idea of where you might find better photos. If you zoom back out to kind of the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Are we going to the red? No, there's no blue over there.
So those like brighter color or the higher ratings kind of in the northwest, those are caused by a storm that's hitting there right now. A lot of snow's falling. The avalanches we're expecting there are mostly caused just by that new snow.
Interesting.
And then if you scroll down, we see most of southern BC has lower danger ratings, like green, yellow. That's largely because it hasn't snowed very much in the last month, really, in southern BC. And so we're not getting a lot of currently new snow, but there is that one zone kind of around Revelstoke in the interior that has orange, considerable rating. And in this case, this is a problem caused by old snow. There's a weak layer buried in the snow, and that's the one producing avalanches right now.
Oh, wow. I'm going to bring this to full screen. So this is interesting. And you can kind of see like the remnants of this and how it has slid down. Hey.
Yeah. And the person taking that photo was right at the top of it. I suspect they likely triggered it. Right now it's a really tricky layer in that region where like it's about, I don't know exactly, like 40 centimeters deep or so. So it's able to produce large but not very large avalanches, and it's a very weak layer that's very easy to trigger. So there's been a lot of people who are going out have been easily triggering this layer. So it's quite a concern right now. And it's trickier because you're not getting that like obvious sign from the weather. It's not pouring new snow. It's not a super hot sunny day. there's not a lot happening in the weather, but this kind of what we call a persistent problem is there. There's this weak layer in the snow that's persisting, and these types of layers often persist for weeks or months.
This is so brilliant how you guys have put this together, because it's not only getting people who are in these areas to take photos and be a part of this recording system, but really doing a good job showing how these different avalanches are happening. This is wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm enjoying this. We could keep going for a couple more hours and just keep on looking at avalanches. Hey,
yeah. It'd be nice. We're hoping like one day have videos in here too, because
no
I've
way.
seen there's been videos of people triggering these types of avalanches recently, and they're quite interesting. I will add that like um, these reports that we get from people out are super helpful, but the vast majority of our information is actually coming is not shown here, the raw data,
Hmm.
but it's coming from other avalanche professionals, so guides, highway forecasters, ski areas. Um, Canada's very unique in that we have this organized effort where we all share our data on like a kind of a private database, and yeah, the forecasts are largely informed by what these professionals are seeing.
Wow. That's incredible. And so that kind of just speaks to just, I mean, how I guess in your opinion, is Canada doing, like, are we ahead of the game, I guess you could say, in avalanche preparedness and having all of this data compared to other countries, or are we still getting better?
Um, I think different areas have different strengths and weaknesses, and we definitely um, are well respected for how we're managing avalanche risk in certain ways, especially if our kind of sharing of data is a really kind of unique thing that's happening by everyone's on board and kind of in this together. And um, we have like good infrastructure in place. We have a professional association that gives us the software to kind of publish and share this data. Um, but there's certainly like other things, like for example, in Europe, they've done a lot of work on the more engineering side and
Mm,
more or less engineered away the avalanche problems for a lot of things. But by that I mean, instead of having to build a highway through a mountain pass and have people monitoring and controlling explosives, if you just dig a tunnel or build a snow shed or like reroute the highway so it's not in that avalanche area,
mm.
um, you've kind of done an actual even better job because you've totally eliminated the chance. It doesn't. Yeah, there's no dependencies on forecasting and controls. It's obviously just very expensive to do that. Making tunnels isn't cheap. And Europe, a lot of people, small mountains, they're able to do it. And there's just so much. The mountains of Western Canada are so big and expansive. It would be very difficult to fully eliminate the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, considering sometimes there's one road in and out of some of these communities, and it's just so costly to maintain and manage them and whatnot.
Mhm.
Wow. Uh, wow. So, quick question for you. Some days, when you're just wanting to see what's going on, do you just sit here, look at this map for hours and like see what's going on, or not really?
Yeah, the photos. I honestly, I think I often do if I'm like writing one of these forecasts is I try
Mm,
to find a webcam that has like the live feed, like often at the top of like a ski hill. That's lots of ski hills have webcams because I'm doing this remotely. Just playing the webcam and you kind of like imagine you're there and seeing the weather kind of helps you get your head into kind of what the weather's doing there. So yeah,
yeah.
and spending a lot of time on Google Earth kind of
Yep.
virtual skiing, trying to learn all of the different like terrain. You have to kind of see like what's the elevation of a point? Is it above the freezing level? Is it going to get rain or snow? How big are the paths there? Are they capable of producing big avalanches? Um, and vegetation is another kind of big factor. So if it's densely forested, it's less likely to get avalanches.
This is this that's really interesting. So, there's a correlation between the amount of forests and whatnot, and basically healthy forests that can prevent avalanches, is what you're saying too, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
They
Why
even
is
have in Europe what they call protection forests, where they've planted trees and like grown forests above like villages to prevent avalanches.
wow, that can I ask why that is?
Why that is? So yeah, the main thing is that the forest breaks up the homogeneous of the homogeneity. The snow
Hmm.
is less homogeneous in the forest because of the trees, basically. So you can't have weaknesses like in a weak layer propagate over wide areas. It's just small little chunks. And generally, the shading from the forest canopy, you get less kind of fluctuations in the radiation balance, less wind. It just kind of tends to create stronger snow.
Wow. That's brilliant. So you told me just before we opened this on that at 5 o'clock my time, we would get to see an update of how this map looks. So I'm gonna press the refresh button. We're gonna see what
It's
changed in the last
very
little bit.
close.
Oh, it's not
Um,
as colorful.
yeah, and it looks like one region is probably in the process of getting published as we speak.
Oh,
But yeah, that storm in the north, I don't remember, I haven't looked in that zone closely, but I think that storm's winding down. So it's now dropped from high to considerable danger. Kind of that kind of snow that initially fell was probably very weak, but now it's had time to kind of settle and strengthen, producing probably fewer avalanches. Yeah.
that's brilliant. So for the audio only people, we've seen the map go from one bright red spot, which was a 4 on the scale, uh, 4 as in high threat or high risk. It's now a 3, and they've got new information around this area talking about recent snow needs time to settle and gain strength. However, human triggered avalanches still remain possible. Just a such a good resource. We could probably spend the next couple hours just going through each one of these and talking more about them. Wow, hey. Okay, but I do have a few more questions for you, and I suspect I don't know if we can be here for another few hours. So that was brilliant. And I guess maybe you touched on it a little bit, but why is Western Canada just so prone to avalanches or whatnot?
Um, in short, because it's one of the snowier places on Earth,
Huh.
you get, yeah, we have the influence of like the Pacific Ocean, a lot of like warm weather systems, and the large cold continental air mass of North America, Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories. It's just a good conditions for forming snow when the kind of these active extratropical cyclones through the winter are coming off the Pacific consistently and they're cooling off from the cold air. You get a lot of snow, and then obviously the recipe for an avalanche is snow and steep terrain.
Mm,
If it's flat or low angle, it's just not going to slide. Um, so there's a lot of mountains.
yeah. And the height of the mountains too, the elevation matters, and I think that's one of the key takeaways because our mountains are they're giant relative to others around the world.
Mm-hmm. Um, and there's one of the things that's interesting about it is that um, the avalanche patterns in each mountain range are slightly different.
Oh,
Um, so well, first off, it tends as you move further from the ocean, um, the weather systems weaken and you get less precipitation. That kind of the air mass is drying out. So the coast range gets a lot of snow. The kind of interior BC mountains get a medium amount, and then the Rockies are drier. And coupled with that, it also the temperatures get colder. Um, and these kind of two things, the amount of snow and the temperatures, play a big role into the kind of the formation of strong and weak layers. And generally, warmer snow is stronger. You kind of think of like trying to make a snowball and it got like warmer, wetter snow, it all
yeah.
sticks together. It really
Oh,
bonds. But if you try to make a snowball with colder snow, it kind of all crumbles apart. And so because of that, you tend to have, on average, stronger snow in the coastal ranges and weaker snow in the Rockies.
That's really interesting. So like the mountains certainly like the proximity to different like areas of climate or the different weather climates really change the risk of avalanche and how avalanches unfold is what
Yeah,
you're saying, right?
yeah.
Wow.
And what I just said, like that's maybe like the easy, obvious, intuitive one, that like these different mountain ranges have vastly different climates, but the same rules apply as you keep scaling down and down. That like you get down into like within one mountain range, there's kind of wet and dry spots, and they'll have totally different patterns. If you zoom in more to a specific valley, there's differences on the north versus south side because there's different energy balances happening from the sun, and the wind might be different. So you have strong and weak contrast in the same valley. Down to a single slope, wind patterns and the types of ground cover underneath the rocks, you create kind of variable amounts and types of snow on a single slope.
That's brilliant. That what so I'm I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna build some snowballs because I'm thinking about all the avalanches that we might see closer to us here in Edmonton compared to further west. That's a really brilliant metaphor and explanation. Wow. Okay. Um, so I want to talk about like I guess the land use planning component to all of this, and we talked a little bit about it. Europe's approach versus Canada. So we do have roadways that are in those those high risk areas, but then we also have like a lot of recreational um, back skiing and whatnot. Do the areas that have more development, I guess you could say, are they seeing more avalanches just because we have the better ability to detect them, or is it more so avalanches just happen everywhere and it's just kind of chance or luck that those communities are there?
Yeah, so generally backcountry recreation, like people skiing, snowmobiling, and hiking, they're kind of in a unique case where it's set up that they're responsible to manage their own risk.
Hmm.
Everything else, there's some kind of like actual planning and um, land use happening. So a common thing is before like structures get built, especially inhabited structures, there's kind of engineers and avalanche experts are mapping out kind of the potential for avalanches at that spot, and they have kind of different categories of how exposed it is, and that's based on how likely avalanches of different sizes might reach that spot.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. So
Yeah,
there's that potential, the potential risk mapping and whatnot.
yeah. I think it's quite similar to other hazards, like producing a risk map, and that's done kind of when there's for certain things. And I guess kind of the unique part of avalanches is there's this other side of it where there's the uncontrolled areas, and
Mhm.
people are out there kind of making their own on the spot assessments.
Wow. So we've talked
We
a lot
also
of. Oh no, you go first.
the term kind of voluntary versus involuntary risk is commonly applied here. The
Mm.
idea is that people who are going out to recreate in the backcountry are kind of hopefully are aware of the risks and they're voluntarily exposing themselves and like have prepared themselves with the tools to avoid avalanches.
Mm.
Whereas people driving on a road or kind of going to a Airbnb at a ski resort that might be like near avalanches, they're kind of involuntarily exposed if they're.
Huh. So have we seen any large avalanches really cut off roadways and like um, isolate communities before in Western Canada, or not necessarily because we've been prepared?
Um, I can't think of like a really like long-term high impact story of like an avalanche fully cutting off an area,
Hmm.
but like every winter roads get closed for like multiple hours. In some cases, some closures can last a few days if there's a big storm and it's not safe to open it. Um, and yeah, sometimes during these, there are large avalanches that will hit the road and need to be cleaned up and like will block transportation. But I think like the higher impact stories I can think of like that happen more in like the Himalayas and the Andes, some of these mountains where they don't have as many systems in place to warn communities. And like, yeah, there's stories of entire villages properly getting cut off by big avalanches.
Yeah, and being hit by avalanches too. And I think that kind of just goes to show our level of preparedness in Canada and how I guess like the ability to do these things is keeping our community safe, whether it's using the big bombs and having the pre-avalanches so that the big ones don't happen. I think that's brilliant. Hmm. Are there, aside from like other, like the bombing of not bombing, I shouldn't say that word, but like the explosives component, are there other ways to mitigate avalanches, or is it more so we just have to continue preparedness and whatnot?
Hmm. Other ways to mitigate. Well, let's kind of work through a few here. For backcountry recreation, the mitigation is avoidance. Like you're trying to just avoid the slopes.
Yep.
You don't want to like try to cause them. Yeah, there's kind of the passive permanent mitigations like building tunnels, snow sheds. There's also, yeah, there's a number of kind of like these passive engineering solutions. Snow sheds are a common one. Some places with snow sheds in Canada would be through Rogers Pass, where you kind of drive underneath these sheds for a bit, and the Coquihalla. But there's also kind of berms and dikes. So these are kind of earth walls that either kind of are built to protect the road, and the avalanche is meant to be stopped by those.
Oh, that's cool.
Or even just you build mounds. So you kind of build these little piles of dirt in the avalanche run out. Right. My dog just showed up. In the avalanche run out, and that's meant to slow down the avalanche before it hits something.
Oh, that's really cool. And so, two questions: is your dog one of the people, or the, I guess, your animal that joins you when you go on the backcountry skiing and whatnot, or are you keeping them at home?
Yeah, he's a poodle, so he doesn't fare well in the snow. It really sticks to him.
Okay, well that's fair. Going back to this idea of like the big mitigation, I think that's interesting. We often think of like berms for rivers, but I've never heard one for avalanches. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think like for anyone, if you're driving along the Trans Canada, some spots you could see them. There's some around Field, through Rogers Pass, and Coquihalla. Those are kind of three spots where, like, if you're driving along the road, you might be able to see them.
That's cool. That realistically, that kind of leads to, I guess, my next question, and I think we've really hinted at it throughout, which is, I've often seen avalanches as like they're really a recreational area more than like a public safety issue. And you've talked like a lot of the risk is for people who are in the backcountry areas, and then for public safety issues where we have a really good handle on managing them. Is that kind of why it's more like geared towards individual preparedness compared to community preparedness for avalanche?
Um, I'd say historically, most of accidents in Canada were kind of more civilian, non-recreational people. Like a lot of them were at work, were working in the mountains or living in them. And yeah, there was a lot of like tragic accidents. Canada's worst accident was in 1905 in Rogers Pass. There was a crew of railway workers shoveling snow off the tracks, and they got struck. The whole crew, I forget the exact number, 50, over 50. And so yeah, there certainly was like this real problem of kind of public safety with people just kind of living or at work being hurt by them. And so a lot of kind of these professional programs came into place to prevent that.
Wow.
And that's kind of generally well handled now, as there's haven't been these types of accidents in decades. And kind of that time when that kind of the last those types of accidents, I think, kind of in like the 50s, 60s. Shortly after that, backcountry winter recreation became a lot more popular, and we saw a lot more of the deaths happening there now, until that's kind of now the primary or almost sole cause of avalanche accidents. There's an average of 11 deaths in avalanches per year in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Which with I think puts it a similar amount to like lightning deaths as kind of the two most like weather related natural hazard deaths. So yeah, there's a lot of effort now kind of going into like more of that side of it, raising awareness and safety for the recreationists, while these existing programs are in place to keep everyone else safe.
That's brilliant. So I mean, as we start to end off today, I have learned so much about, well, obviously all the tools that you guys have and provide and all the cool information. But I guess what's one, I guess, misconception about avalanches that you want to clear up here and now and that you think is worthy of pointing out?
Ooh. What was one misconception?
Can't think of one. We can move on to the next questions.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a misconception, but the fact that like a lot of accidents are caused by a lot of kind of underlying social factors and like biases and people's situational awareness. And yeah, a lot of accidents have been kind of been traced to these kind of more human behavior elements of
that aligns nicely with like the theme of this podcast, which is really about like how a lot of human factors and really the preconditions of our societies and how we act is often the catalyst for disasters, but then also makes them worse. So very good point. Thank you. You've just you've made the trailer for this episode. But thinking about it, like when we think about the most common error people make in judging avalanches, what do you think that is? Is it you think that it won't happen to them, or is it maybe it won't be as bad as they think?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of challenges in like recognizing terrain, recognizing like where you're located in terrain on a slope, and whether there's potential for an avalanche, whether it's going to be started at that location or if it's going to start above you and hit you. Being aware of locations in terrain and how every step you take through the mountains, you're probably changing your exposure to avalanches. And it's hard to be fully aware of where you are. Kind of, there could be many these human factors. There could be visibility. There could just be like a understanding of like where avalanches are possible in terrain.
Wow, that's brilliant, and that's why we have the avalanche map, avalanche.ca, right?
I'll say that that's like one general rating for a very large area, and like things are changing at such small spatial and temporal scales. It's really just the starting point for people going out, and then you need to really be situationally aware of your environment, kind of where you're locating, what changes are happening to the weather, because that overall trend for a big region might not always apply for the time and place where you are.
So that's brilliant. I think some of my favorite points from today have been the idea of what avalanches actually are, dry versus wet, kind of looking at if it's maybe a slab versus not. And I liked how when we were in the map, we were actually able to see examples of what different avalanches look like. Among the big one, which I'll show again, possibly our 3 or our 4, and whatnot, and how these have the potential to wipe entire forests on the sides of mountains, but also homes and communities if they were ever to reach that point. I think that's a really interesting consideration. Those are certainly my favorite parts. If you had to, I guess, um, any parting words of wisdom around avalanche safety for people considering going out this weekend, let's say.
Yeah. Well, the tagline is get the training, get the gear, and get the forecast. Those are kind of the three parts of it. So the training, that comes, there's a number of parts that you get from taking a training course.
Mhm.
That big first one is being able to recognize avalanche terrain. Maybe even if you're not planning to try to like go into avalanche terrain and make these decisions, if you're going into the mountains, there's a chance that the place you're planning on going could be impacted by avalanches. So you need at least some basic terrain recognition skills if you're going into the winter backcountry. And then the training will also tell you kind of how to plan a trip using like the resources that you just showed, and how to and what to do if somebody in your group is caught. So how to do perform a rescue. These are all critical things. And then getting the forecast is really key because it's changing all the time. You can't really count on the information you saw last weekend. It could be totally different.
Day to day, it's totally different, right? So thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you guys do. This has been brilliant. And I guess if anybody has any questions, where would they be able to reach you, Dr. Horton?
I think just email me the best way at shorton@avalanche.ca.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you for sticking around for an hour and 15 minutes of avalanches. And I hope you learned as much as I did. This is brilliant. I love the visuals of how you guys are promoting a lot of this. So I think you guys are doing excellent work. Definitely going to have you back on the pod in the future. But thank you to you, Dr. Horton, for being here, and thank you to you for sticking around and hearing what we had to say. This was an interesting episode, so thank you very much. And
Yeah,
with
thanks. It was a really fun conversation.
yeah, absolutely. And with that, that's all we got for today. So thanks and later.